Have you ever wondered how faith can move mountains, literally? In Colossae, a small town almost forgotten in time, something extraordinary happened. An imminent threat of destruction hung over the sacred spring, a site venerated by the inhabitants as a symbol of divine protection. With a river diverted to flood the sanctuary, it seemed that the end was inevitable. But then something miraculous happened. The Archangel Michael, with his flaming sword and heavenly light, transformed the course of the waters and marked history with a miracle that defied human comprehension. What led a people to trust unconditionally in the divine, even in the face of the impossible? And how did this event shape the faith and hope of entire generations? Today we will explore how the power of faith, coupled with divine intervention, changed the fate of Colossae and left us a legacy that echoes to the present day. Get ready for a story of courage, devotion, and miracles that defy time and reason. Among the numerous celestial beings described in religious traditions, one of them stands out as a universal symbol of strength, protection, and justice: the Archangel Michael. In sacred texts and popular accounts, he is often referred to as the Prince of the Celestial Hosts, a title that reflects his unique position as the leader of the angelic armies in battles against the forces of evil. However, who really is Miguel, and why does his figure inspire so much fascination and devotion? The first clear mention of Archangel Michael in the Bible is in the book of Daniel, where he is described as a protector of God's people in times of great distress. Later in the book of Revelation, Michael appears as the commander who leads the angels into battle against the dragon, a representation of absolute evil in Satan. His triumph in this battle symbolizes the ultimate victory of light over darkness. For many, Michael is not only a physical advocate, but also a spiritual intercessor, someone who fights for souls and protects them from both visible and invisible dangers. Despite being widely associated with Christianity, the figure of Michael transcends religious barriers. In Judaism, he is seen as the protective angel of Israel, and in Islam, he is called Michael, a merciful angel who brings rain and sustenance to the faithful. This convergence of beliefs demonstrates the universal impact of his image, always associated with the struggle for justice and the fulfillment of the divine plan. In addition, many cultures associate Michael with specific miracles. Not only does he appear in heavenly visions and interventions, but he is also credited with actions that change the fate of entire cities and peoples. From protecting holy temples to defeating evil armies, Michael's performance is seen as a reminder that divine protection is always present for those who believe. One of these remarkable episodes took place in Colossae, an ancient city in the region of Phrygia, in what is now Turkey. There, Michael intervened in such a powerful way that the event is remembered as one of the greatest miracles in Christian history. But before we dive into this incredible episode, it's important to understand the setting where it all occurred and why Colossus is so special. The ancient city of Colossae, located in the mountainous region of Phrygia, was a place that, at first glance, did not seem destined to be the scene of a miracle. Despite its historical importance, Colossae was often overshadowed by neighboring cities such as Laodicea and Hierapolis, which attracted more attention due to their wealth and political influence. However, Colossae possessed something that no other city could claim: a sacred spring whose story would become inseparable from the miracle attributed to the Archangel Michael. This spring, located on the outskirts of the city, was considered a place of healing and spiritual renewal. Pilgrims from all over came to fetch its waters, which, according to local belief, had been blessed by Michael in an earlier event, the details of which were already lost to time. To the inhabitants of Colossae, the fountain was a tangible sign of divine presence and heavenly protection. Its importance went beyond the physical, representing the unwavering faith that united the community. However, this faith was often tested. Colossae was not isolated from strife and dispute, and the presence of the sacred fountain generated both admiration and envy. Neighboring peoples, motivated by religious or political rivalries, saw the spiritual strength of Colossae as a threat to the balance of power. Rumors began to spread that outside forces were planning to destroy the shrine, thus extinguishing the most powerful symbol of the Colossian faith. It was in this tense context that the threat began to materialize. On a silent night, residents received information that a devastating flood was being orchestrated to destroy the fountain. For many, the news seemed to be the end of their hope. But for others, it was an opportunity to prove that divine protection was real and that Archangel Michael would answer their prayers. As residents gathered around the fountain, praying fervently for divine intervention, the sense of imminent danger grew. What happened next not only saved Colossae, but also etched Archangel Michael's name into history as an active defender of the faith. The city of Colossae, once a bastion of faith and unity, was facing its greatest trial. The threat of imminent destruction hung over the sacred spring, a place that the locals considered the spiritual heart of the region. But what was at stake was much more than the integrity of a physical location. It was the people's own faith, tested in a way that few could imagine. The legend that circulated among the inhabitants said that the fountain had been blessed by Archangel Michael himself in an ancient and miraculous event. According to the reports, he had appeared at a time of great need to consecrate that place as a sacred refuge. The water that flowed from there was seen not only as a divine gift, but as tangible evidence of Michael's presence and protection. For generations, the residents of Colossae have passed down this history, creating an unbreakable connection between the source and their faith. However, the new threat put this faith at risk. The course of the river near the city was being manipulated by neighboring tribes with the aim of destroying the source and the belief associated with it. It was a painstaking attack designed to weaken the morale of the people and erase their spiritual identity. More than a flood, it represented the attempt to obliterate the connection that the Colossians believed they had with the divine. For many, the situation seemed hopeless. The physical and political forces that threatened the city were too powerful to be countered with the human resources available. But amid the growing fear, something profound began to emerge, a collective faith that defied logic. The inhabitants, even in the face of danger, refused to abandon their beliefs. They gathered in vigils and sang songs in praise of the Archangel Michael, hoping that he would once again intervene on their behalf. On the night before the attack, reports speak of a peculiar energy in the air. The wind seemed to carry the prayers of the Colossians, and the sound of the threatening waters was drowned out by the force of the voices that cried out to Michael. Despair and devotion coexisted, creating a moment of spiritual intensity that many would describe as miraculous. As dawn approached, the faithful prepared to face what they believed to be inevitable destruction. However, even in the face of the possibility of the end, one certainty remained in the hearts of the people. Michael would hear his call, and as daylight began to dawn on the horizon, the first signs of his intervention began to manifest. In the heart of Colossae, the sacred spring was more than a physical landmark. It was the spiritual essence that defined the city and united its inhabitants. According to tradition, the fountain was blessed in ancient times by the Archangel Michael himself, who would have appeared in the midst of a storm of light to purify the place. From then on, the water that gushed from there was considered miraculous, with healing and purifying properties that attracted pilgrims from distant regions. The fountain was surrounded by a unique natural beauty. Smooth stones formed a kind of natural altar around it, while large trees seemed to protect it with their dense crowns. Many said that when approaching the fountain, it was possible to feel an inexplicable peace, as if Miguel himself was present. It was not only a place of faith, but a spiritual refuge where the faithful sought comfort and renewal. However, like any sacred place, the fountain also aroused the envy and resentment of those who did not share the Colossian faith. Neighboring peoples, bothered by the spiritual strength that the sanctuary represented, began to conspire against the city. The fountain was seen as a symbol of the resistance and unity of the inhabitants, something that needed to be destroyed to weaken their resolve. It would not be a direct attack with weapons or soldiers, but a more insidious and devastating onslaught. The plan was to redirect the course of the nearby river, forcing its waters to flood the area of the source. It was a calculated attack, designed to not only destroy the shrine, but also shake the faith of the city. If the fountain were destroyed, it would be easy to convince the inhabitants that their belief in divine protection was misguided. It was a strategy that attacked the body and soul of Colossae. News of the conspiracy spread quickly among the residents. Although there was despair in some parts of the city, many refused to accept that the fate of the spring was sealed. Led by local priests, the Colossians gathered around the shrine to pray. Candles were lit, and voices echoed through the mountains as they pleaded for Michael's intervention. For them, the fountain was not just a place of water, it was a symbol that the divine walked among men. Meanwhile, the sound of the redirected waters became louder. Time was scarce, and many questioned whether Miguel would answer the call. Tension was growing, but the residents remained united in their devotion. The accounts describe a moment when the wind stopped blowing, and a deep silence took over the room. It was as if nature itself was waiting for an outcome. Against this backdrop of hope and despair, the first signs of a miracle began to emerge. Something inexplicable was about to happen, something that would forever change the way Colossae and the world viewed the intervention. On the darkest night in the history of Colossae, the faith of its inhabitants was put to the test as never before. The threat of destruction hung in the air as the roar of waters redirected by the river echoed through the nearby mountains. However, in the midst of the impending chaos, something extraordinary began to happen, a movement of unity and devotion that transcended any human act. It was as if the collective spirit of the city converged in a single cry for salvation. Men, women, and children, all with their hopes and fears, made their way to the sacred spring. The atmosphere was charged with tension and expectation, but also with unshakable faith. They knew that they could not stop the advance of the waters with their own hands, but they believed that their devotion would be heard in the heavens. There, kneeling in a circle around the fountain, they began to chant songs and prayers that had been passed down from generation to generation. It was a powerful, vibrant supplication, as if each word carried centuries of accumulated faith. Later accounts describe the intensity of the prayers as something out of the ordinary. They were not just words repeated mechanically, but cries coming from the core of every soul present. Some people wept, others raised their hands to the sky, while voices resounded in unison, asking for the intervention of Archangel Michael. "Do not abandon us," they said. "Show us that your protection is still our fortress." It was a prayer that transcended the physical plane, reaching the spiritual. Meanwhile, the destructive force of the river was fast approaching. The strategy of the enemies was cruel and ruthless. The waters advanced with a deafening sound, as if they were a harbinger that nothing would be left standing. For the Colossians, the sacred spring was not only a place of faith, but also the pillar of their identity. If it were destroyed, they would lose more than a physical space. They would lose their direct connection to the divine. However, something began to change. As the people prayed fervently, witnesses said that a peculiar glow began to appear on the horizon. First, it was just a point of light, almost imperceptible. But as the prayers intensified, the glow expanded, enveloping the fountain area in a golden aura. The wind, which had previously been blowing strongly, suddenly ceased. The sound of the threatening waters was replaced by absolute silence. It seemed that even nature was waiting for what was to come. At this point, many believed that their faith had been heard. The glow became brighter, illuminating not only the fountain, but also the faces of the assembled faithful. They felt a presence that they could not explain in words, but which they immediately recognized as divine. It was as if Miguel was there, answering the call of his people. Then something unexpected happened. The waters of the river, which were advancing mercilessly, began to lose strength. There was no visible barrier or human intervention, but the reports are unanimous in stating that the waters simply receded, as if obeying a celestial order. For the faithful, this was the first sign that Miguel was intervening directly to protect the city. What happened that night was more than a moment of survival. It was the reaffirmation of faith that the divine not only hears, but acts in defense of those who believe. The call of the faithful crossed the heavens, and Miguel was about to perform an act that would be remembered for generations. As the inhabitants of Colossae stood in prayer around the fountain, something truly supernatural began to manifest in the sky above them. The golden glow that had appeared on the horizon became more intense, illuminating the entire area, as if the sun had decided to rise in the middle of the night. The nearby mountains, once shrouded in darkness, were bathed in a light that seemed to come from a heavenly source. The air was heavy, like before a storm. But this was no ordinary storm. There was no thunder or lightning, just a palpable energy that made the faithful feel something that many described as the very presence of the divine. The wind, which had ceased moments before, returned with force, but this time it seemed to dance around the fountain, protecting it. The leaves of the trees fluttered, and the spring water seemed to glow with an otherworldly intensity. The reports of those who were present are almost unanimous. A vortex of light formed in the sky, directly above the fountain. It was as if heaven was opening to reveal the heavenly kingdom. In the center of this vortex, a figure began to take shape. It was immense, resplendent, and encased in golden armor that reflected light in all directions. In his hand, he held a sword that seemed to be made of pure fire, radiating warmth and authority. The Colossians had no doubts. It was the Archangel Michael, responding to the call of his people. Michael's presence not only brought comfort and hope to the faithful, but also had a transformative effect on the environment. The river, which continued to advance, seemed to hesitate at the apparition. The waters, which had previously flowed with fury, began to slow down, as if subjected to a greater force. The enemies who had diverted the course of the river were at a safe distance, but even they reported feeling an inexplicable fear, as if an unseen force was watching them. Michael did not say a word, but his presence was eloquent. The faithful felt that he was not only there to protect the source, but also to reaffirm that faith is never in vain. The wind around the fountain intensified, forming an almost impenetrable barrier of light and energy. Even those who were closest could not see what was happening within that circle of light. All they knew was that Miguel was acting, and that his intervention would be definitive. Then, in an act that left everyone astonished, Michael raised his sword toward the sky. A flash of light swept across the horizon, followed by a sound that many described as a heavenly melody, but powerful enough to shake the ground. The waters of the river, which were about to flood the area of the source, were suddenly redirected. They not only stopped, but began to follow a new course, forming a gorge that led the waters away from the city. Not only did this event save Colossae, but it also marked a turning point in the city's history. For the inhabitants, it was confirmation that Michael was not only a symbol of their faith, but a living and active force. The divine storm that accompanied him was the seal of his intervention, a reminder that heaven always responds when called by those who believe. What happened that night in Colossae was an unforgettable testimony of divine strength. After Michael's arrival and the emergence of his protective light, the confrontation between impending doom and the unwavering faith of the faithful reached its apex. The river, which had been diverted to flood the sacred spring, seemed to take on a life of its own, advancing violently, as if to challenge the presence of the Archangel. While the inhabitants watched, paralyzed between hope and fear, Michael acted. The celestial figure, raising his flaming sword, seemed to emit an energy that echoed through the landscape. It was at that moment that the impossible began to happen. The flow of the waters, previously uncontrollable, began to slow down, as if obeying an invisible and powerful force. Michael not only stopped the destruction, but redirected its course. The waters began to be led along a new path, carved into the ground so perfectly that many believed it was an architectural miracle. It was as if the terrain itself had been shaped to create a canal that would take the river away from the city. The new watercourse seemed to obey Michael's orders, flowing serenely away from the sacred spring and the area inhabited by his devotees. For the Colossians, what was unfolding before their eyes was not just a defense against destruction, but a clear message. The faith they had placed in Michael had not been in vain. The Archangel's strength was not only spiritual, but also physical, capable of altering the natural world in defense of believers. That act of diverting the waters was not just a rescue. It was a reaffirmation of the divine connection that they had always felt, but which now manifested itself in a tangible way. As the course of the river changed, the light surrounding Miguel seemed to intensify. Witnesses reported that the glow was so strong that many had to avert their eyes, unable to withstand such intensity. However, even without seeing directly, they felt the presence of the Archangel in every fiber of their being. It was a sense of protection, strength, and peace that they had never experienced before. The enemies who were watching from a safe distance were equally astonished. Some reports suggest that many of them abandoned their posts, gripped by an inexplicable fear. It wasn't just the failure of their strategy that worried them, but the feeling that they had faced something far beyond their understanding. Michael not only protected Colossae, he sent a clear message to anyone who dared to challenge the faith and holiness of that place. When the waters finally settled into their new course, Michael lowered his sword. The light around him began to slowly dissipate, and the figure of the Archangel disappeared as mysteriously as it had appeared. What remained was a deep silence, as if nature itself was absorbing the meaning of what had just happened. The inhabitants, still on their knees, gradually got up, many with tears in their eyes. The fountain was intact, protected by a force that no enemy would be able to overcome. That moment marked not only the salvation of Colossae, but also the beginning of a new era for its residents. Miguel's presence would not only be remembered, it would be celebrated as the greatest testimony that faith can move mountains and divert rivers. After the extraordinary events of that night, Colossae was no longer just a city on the map of Phrygia. She became a living symbol of divine intervention, a place where Archangel Michael's power had manifested itself so clearly that it was impossible to deny. The residents, who had witnessed the diversion of the waters and felt the heavenly presence, began to share their stories, and each account contributed to consolidating the memory of the miracle that had changed everything. The testimonies were numerous and consistent. Many described the golden light that surrounded the fountain, shining with an almost unbearable intensity. Others spoke of the majestic figure of Michael, whose presence inspired a mixture of reverence and peace. Some residents claimed to have heard a voice, not with their ears, but within their own souls, assuring them that the city was under divine protection. Despite the different perspectives, one thing was common to all. No one who witnessed that moment remained the same. Among the accounts, one of the most impressive came from a group of children who were on the periphery of the prayer circle. They claimed to have seen Michael's flaming sword streak across the sky and create a kind of invisible barrier that prevented the waters from advancing. For the faithful, this was a reminder of Michael's protective strength, but also a sign that he did not act alone. His presence reflected the divine will, a balance between justice and mercy. The effects of the miracle were not limited to the physical salvation of the city. The spiritual impact was profound. People who previously had doubts about their faith found in Michael the answer to their uncertainties. Even those who did not directly participate in the prayers felt the weight of what had happened. The fountain, now untouched and protected, has become an even more powerful symbol. It was visited by residents and pilgrims from distant lands who came to seek not only the healing properties of its waters, but also some of the spiritual strength that seemed to emanate from it. The enemies who had planned the destruction were also affected. Many reported an inexplicable sense of dread while attempting to divert the river. Some abandoned their intentions to attack Colossae altogether, believing that challenging the city meant facing a force far beyond their capabilities. Others, impressed by what they had witnessed, decided to change their lives, seeking to learn about the faith that moved the Colossians. Over time, the events of that night were documented, first by local priests, then by travelers who listened to the accounts of the residents. What was a shared story among the inhabitants of Colossae became a legend that spread to neighboring regions and eventually crossed borders. For many, Michael's miracle at Colossae was more than an isolated event. It was a reminder that the divine is not far away, but acts directly in human history. Such an impact was also felt in future generations. The children who witnessed the miracle grew up telling their stories to their children and grandchildren. The city became a center of devotion to Michael, and the fountain, once a sacred site, was now seen as a living altar of his protection. The strength of the Colossian faith was not only restored, but amplified, cementing Michael's reputation as the heavenly guardian who never forsakes those who call upon him in sincere faith. Thus, the miracle of Colossae not only changed the fate of the city, he transformed the way people saw their relationship with the divine. For the faithful, it was a reminder that even in the face of the greatest adversity, those who maintain their faith can witness the extraordinary. The miracle at Colossae was not only a landmark event for its inhabitants, he became a powerful symbol of faith, protection, and hope for all who heard the story. Archangel Michael's intervention left deep imprints, not only on the ground, but also in the hearts and minds of those who experienced or were inspired by the event. Colossae has gone from being an anonymous town in the Phrygian region to a spiritual beacon, living proof that faith can overcome even the most uncontrollable forces of nature. The sacred fountain, which was once a symbol of local devotion, has taken on universal significance. It came to represent not only the physical miracle of the diversion of the waters, but also the invisible force that unites the faithful in times of adversity. For residents, the fountain was a daily reminder that Miguel had answered their prayers and positioned himself as an advocate, not just for a place, but for a cause, the preservation of faith in times of crisis. As time passed, Colossae became a place of pilgrimage. People from distant lands traveled to visit the spring and feel the spiritual energy that seemed to emanate from its waters. Many came in search of healing, not only physical, but also spiritual, believing that Miguel was still present in that place. The story of the miracle was told and retold, not as a distant tale, but as a living testimony that the divine is ever attentive to the sincere cries of believers. The symbolism of Colossae, however, went beyond the physical. It reflected values that transcended the city and its community. The faith of the Colossians, demonstrated in the vigils and prayers leading up to the miracle, was a reminder that even in the most desperate situations, belief in the good can be the sustaining force. The protection offered by Michael represented the certainty that the heavens do not abandon those who remain steadfast in their devotion. And the result, the salvation of the fountain and the city, was a message of hope for all who face their own battles. The diversion of the waters in itself became a powerful metaphor. It represented the ability to redirect not only rivers, but also the course of events, even when all seems lost. For the faithful, Michael not only saved Colossae, but also taught a lesson. Faith can transform the most adverse circumstances. Just as he guided the river to a new path, he can also guide those who trust in his protection to a better destination. In addition, Colossae came to be seen as an example of unity. During the threat, the inhabitants put their differences aside and united around a greater purpose. This union was crucial in attracting divine intervention, showing that the strength of a people lies in its ability to connect around a shared faith. For other communities, Colossae has become an inspiration for how collective faith can achieve the impossible. The city's spiritual legacy lived on, passed down from generation to generation. Even centuries later, the story of Michael's miracle at Colossae remained an enduring example that the divine not only observes but also acts. The symbolism of the event echoes to this day, reminding everyone that heavenly protection is within reach of those who maintain their faith, even when circumstances seem most challenging. Colossae, more than a place, became an idea that faith, protection, and hope are the forces that keep us steadfast, no matter how big the storm we face. The miracle at Colossae was not just an isolated event, he has become part of a legacy that spans the centuries. Archangel Michael's intervention at that critical moment left such a profound impact that his influence continues to echo to this day, inspiring millions of people around the world to maintain their faith and believe in divine protection, even in the face of the greatest adversity. After the miraculous diversion of the waters and the salvation of the sacred spring, the city of Colossae consolidated itself as a spiritual center of devotion to the Archangel Michael. The spring, which was once a place of regional importance, has become a sanctuary recognized for its direct link to the divine. Pilgrims from distant regions traveled days, even months, to see the spot where Michael had shown his strength and compassion. Many came in search of physical healing, but others simply desired to be where the heavenly presence had been so tangible. Stories of the miracle were passed down orally and later documented in religious and historical texts. Priests dedicated to Michael's cult created annual festivities in his honor, celebrating not only what he had done for Colossae, but also his continued intercession for those who invoke his name. In many accounts, Michael was described as not only the protector of the city, but the guardian of all who face battles, be they spiritual, emotional, or physical. The impact of the miracle transcended geographical and cultural boundaries. The story of Colossae spread to other regions, even inspiring devotions in distant countries. Churches and chapels dedicated to Michael began to spring up in various parts of the world. many of them with images depicting his victory over the destructive forces symbolized by the river. Every altar, every stained glass window, and every painting was a reminder that Michael was the supreme defender, always ready to respond to the call of the faithful. In addition, the legacy of the miracle influenced Christian theology and spirituality. Michael came to be seen as more than a celestial warrior. It became a symbol of constant protection and divine justice. His figure reminded the faithful that, even in times of greater trial, they were not alone. The message that emerged from the miracle was clear. Sincere faith will always be rewarded, and divine help is never out of reach for those who seek it with a pure heart. In the collective memory, the episode in Colossae has become an inspiration. Stories about Miguel continue to be told in sermons, celebrations, and conversations among the faithful. For many, the miracle is not just an event of the past, but a living reminder that the divine can act in any moment of need. Even today, people facing challenges find solace in Michael's story in Colossae, seeing it as an example that the impossible can be overcome. The legacy also persists in modern religious practices. The celebration of the day of the Archangel Michael on September 29th often includes mentions of the miracle of Colossae, reinforcing the link between the Archangel and his historical intervention. In the liturgies, Michael is invoked as protector of communities and intercessor with God. For those who know history, this invocation carries a special meaning. It dates back to the moment when Michael answered the cry of a people and forever changed his destiny. Today, Colossae may no longer be the vibrant city it was in antiquity, but its history lives on. The ruins of the site still attract curious visitors and devotees, all looking for a glimpse of the place where heaven touched the earth. The sacred spring, even in a more modest state, remains a point of spiritual connection, proving that miracles are not forgotten. They become part of a people's soul. Archangel Michael's legacy is ultimately a powerful reminder. He teaches us that, no matter how dark the times, divine light can intervene. The miracle at Colossae is more than a story. It is a promise that heaven is attentive to the cries of humanity, ready to act when faith becomes our greatest strength. And now, member of Living from YouTube, after knowing this extraordinary story about Archangel Michael and the miracle of Colossae, it's time to reflect. How does this narrative inspire you to face your own challenges? If you like this content and believe that it can touch the hearts of others, share this video with friends and family. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss more inspiring stories like this. And more. Write in the comments. What do you think we can learn from Archangel Michael's legacy? Have you had experiences that have strengthened your faith? Let's talk about it. Remember, the world may be full of challenges, but as with Colossae, faith can be the key to transforming even the most difficult situations.